Thank you, and good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I've so enjoyed my time here with you so far. What I'd like to talk to you about today is the state of the union, is what does the profession which you seek to enter look like these days. And most of my comments will have to do with orchestras because that's what I know. But I hope that the pianists and the singers and the composers among you will find things that apply to your little corner of the universe as well. Ours is a profession which is prone to periodic bouts of deep pessimism. And those of us who've been in the business for a while are used to hearing that the sky is falling. Obviously, the current economic situation is affecting us in ways that we don't even totally understand yet. But these things do go in cycles. And just as the stock market goes up and down, the pessimism market in the music world also goes up and down. The CEO of one of our important orchestras found a letter in the orchestra's files, which was from the president of the board to the then CEO. And the letter said approximately this: "All you see at our concerts is gray hair. All we play is Beethoven and Tchaikovsky. Our expenses are horrendously high. Our income can't keep up. Our audiences are diminishing, and if we don't do something about it, we're going to be out of business in 3 years." The letter was dated 1957. And the orchestra in question is still very much with us. But there is a fair amount of bad news out there. And before I get to the good news, I'd like to get the bad news out of the way. The first is that, and I hate to be this direct about it, but we are producing a product which much of our society simply doesn't value. You will all experience the following conversation. "Hello, what do you do?" "I'm a musician." "Oh, really? What kind of a musician?" "I play in the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra." "Oh, that's nice. What's your job?" It is very important, if you have this conversation, that you not look down on the person who's on the other end of it. It's just that we haven't done a good enough job of educating them about what we do. I so enjoyed the convocation last week when your colleague was speaking about his trip to Greece, and one of the first things he said was what a broadening experience foreign travel is. Those of you who've had the chance to spend time in a German-speaking country may have experienced the fact that in Germany and in Austria, the kind of music that we produce is as essential to life as sports is here. The cab drivers in Vienna know who is singing at the opera that night. It's a wonderful thing for a musician to experience. It's a society in which people would no sooner go for a day without music than they would go without breakfast. In a city in Germany the size of Pittsburgh, there would be 5 full-time, full-size, fully professional symphony orchestras, 1 major opera company, 1 or 2 minor opera companies, and probably a professional choir or 2, which not only means that there's a lot of work for musicians, but it means that music is embedded into the society in a way which it isn't here. And I think what we're doing in our country is a typically American audacious experiment, which is we are trying to graft what is essentially an 18th century European art form onto the most heterogeneous society on the face of the earth. So really what we're doing in a sense is missionary work. And if, say, 6% of the population might be inclined to come and hear us play, our job is to get that to 6.1, and for the next generation to get it to 6.2. Next piece of bad news. We have lost in this country, for the most part, the notion that education in the arts is part of a general public education. Now, there is nothing worse than somebody my age standing in front of a group of people your age and starting a sentence with the words, "when I was your age." But when I was your age, I went to a very large high school in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, which had 3,000 students. And we had, in our high school, an orchestra, 2 bands, a jazz band, 3 choirs, and credit courses in music theory and music history. I dare say none of your high schools had that. And I dare say it would be very hard to find a school that does, although there are school districts throughout the country that actually are still doing a very good job in arts education. What was important about that was not that I and a couple of my classmates became professional musicians. It was the fact that so many of my schoolmates had the hands-on experience of creating music in their own way. And we know that the biggest indicator of interest among audiences and potential audiences in the arts is not wealth. It's not that art is for rich people. That's not it. It's the biggest indicator is education, the educational level, and repeated early exposure to music. I dare say that most of the people who you see at Heinz Hall on a typical Friday or Saturday night played an instrument when they were young, even if they weren't very good. But what I experienced in high school is the golden era, and it's not going to come back. And how we deal with that is a big challenge for us as performers. Next piece of bad news. We live in a celebrity-driven culture. That great Pittsburgher Andy Warhol was correct. Everybody will be famous for 15 minutes. In a week, no one will have heard of Joe the plumber because he will have had his 15 minutes. Now, the problem with this in our world is that it places the emphasis on performers. And as great as Yo-Yo Ma is, as great as Lang Lang is, as great as Hilary Hahn is, I would venture that ultimately John Adams is more important because we need composers. So this whole celebrity thing skews the public view of what it is that we do. Next issue. We live in a world with a short attention span. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but I've been talking for about 7 minutes, and I would guess that several of you have checked your email. How does that square with playing a Bruckner symphony, where the slow movement can take 27 minutes? It's an issue. We also live in a visual age. When the eye and the ear are in competition, the eye wins every time. Our audiences listen with their eyes. And the difficulty with that is that we're trying to get them to see with their ears, but they listen with their eyes. It happens increasingly in my own experience that some very nice person will come up to me after a concert and say, "You just look like you're having so much fun," even after Mahler 6. And I say to them, in as polite a way as I can, "I hope you also enjoyed what you heard." And they always say, "Oh, yes, of course." So again, it's important not to be condescending. In a situation like that, one of our local arts reporters in Memphis wrote in the newspaper a couple of years ago, "I saw a concert by the Memphis Symphony last night." Okay, fine. Last piece of bad news, and then I'm done with that. We're drowning in information. Information is not knowledge. Just like art is not entertainment. And that's not to put down entertainment. I will be watching the first episode of 30 Rock tonight. You will too, probably. Entertainment has a place in our lives, an important place. I'm also a sports fan. That's another important kind of entertainment. Even though I'm from Cleveland, I'm sorry, Steelers guys. Sorry. But entertainment is about what you already know. And art is about what we don't know. And although much of what we do as artists can and should be entertaining, nonetheless, we have a higher purpose. And that sometimes can also become increasingly difficult to deal with. Okay, that's the end of the bad news. Now, except for the first thing that I mentioned, which is our being kind of a fringe activity, all of these developments have occurred more or less in your parents' lifetimes. Or they've become more, they were always there, but they become noticeable more noticeable in your parents' lifetimes. And the fact is that things have changed enormously, and the change will not stop. Two things have happened in the world of classical music in the last 5 years, which 10 years ago one could not have conceived of. One of them is the increasing elimination of music criticism and arts coverage from daily newspapers. In Pittsburgh, you're lucky. You have a newspaper which is still doing the job. In a lot of places, they're not. And the newspapers are in trouble. We know this. They're being supplanted by the internet. And we don't know how that's going to come out. So the arts are the first thing to go. It would have been inconceivable to me, as somebody who has a fairly large CD collection, that Tower Records would go out of business. But it is. The whole aspect of commercial recording, not just in our kind of music, but in any kind of music, is really up in the air right now. The problem for us is that MP3 files of orchestral music really sound terrible, don't they? The internet is going to be part of this ultimately, but it just hasn't sorted itself out yet. We haven't figured it out. But my point is that change is constant, it is accelerating, and it is not going to stop. Now here comes the best piece of good news. There has finally been, within the profession, recognition of the fact that things are changing and that we've got to change with them. This is inherently a conservative business, and it hasn't changed quickly, and it hasn't changed easily. And it has felt to some of us for a long time that to produce, to use the current phrase, the change we need. No endorsement there. To produce the change we need is like turning a battleship. It takes a very long time and a lot of space, and we don't have a very long time and a lot of space. The institutions that produce our art, symphony orchestras, opera companies, theater companies, dance companies, museums, have all recognized the fact that we have to change. And I'd like to tell you about two projects that we've been doing in Memphis. Not because they're so special, they're not, but because they're typical of what's going on. And this will be an indication of some of the issues that you will be dealing with when you leave this beautiful cocoon that you're in and enter the real world.